There comes a moment in your life when something inside you shifts long before you understand why. A quiet tremor in your awareness. A sense that the life you've been living is no longer the full story. Most people overlook these moments. They dismiss them as restlessness or fatigue. But you didn't. You couldn't. Something in you registered the moment it happened. The instant your consciousness reached a threshold it could no longer ignore. And whether you realized it or not, that moment was not random. It was timed. You didn't wake up because things became unbearable or because you needed a new direction. You awakened because a deeper intelligence within you recognized that the world and the field around you had begun to shift. Before your mind had words for it, your awareness felt it. A subtle, energetic pressure, a thinning of the old structure, a faint tremor in the collective field. You sensed this long before you could explain it, and that sensing was the first sign that your awakening wasn't accidental. You were responding to something real, something emerging beneath the surface of your everyday life. If you're honest with yourself, you've known this for a while. You've felt that your timing has always been different. You may not have understood it, but you sensed the rhythms of your life rearranging themselves in ways that didn't match the people around you. You felt the disconnection from old identities before there was a reason. You felt the emotional unraveling before anything collapsed. You felt the pull towards something higher without knowing where it was leading. And you've wondered quietly why your inner world was shifting so much faster than the world you were standing in. But you're beginning to see it now. Something in you woke early because something was approaching. There's a pattern to awakening that most people never notice. It doesn't begin with understanding, it begins with resonance, a vibration inside you that responds to a change in the field. Long before the change becomes visible, you felt that resonance. You recognized it without knowing how. You felt the growing tension between who you were and who you were becoming, even when nothing in your life explained the difference. And that recognition is the first sign that your system is attuned to frequencies others have not yet learned to perceive. You may not think of yourself this way, but you have always been sensitive to coherence. You feel when something is tightening beneath the surface. You sense when the collective is about to shift long before it reaches the physical world. This sensitivity is not fragility, it's intelligence. It's the reason your awakening began earlier than you expected. And this is where the paradox emerges. You were waking before you understood what you were waking into. If you look back at the earliest signs, they weren't loud, they were subtle, almost invisible. A drifting away from old conversations, a softening of habits that once felt comforting, a sense of watching your own life from a slight distance, a desire for quiet without knowing why. These were not failures of engagement. They were the first adjustments of your inner system preparing for a change the world had not yet made. And you felt them because you were wired to notice what others overlook. You may have judged yourself for this. You may have wondered why you couldn't stay asleep like everyone else seemed to. Why the things that stabilized others no longer grounded you. Why familiar environments felt heavy. Why responsibilities that once gave you purpose suddenly felt misaligned. But this misalignment wasn't a problem, it was timing. You were being pulled out of the density of your old life so you could sense the field clearly. And even now you can feel that this message is aligning with something you've quietly known. Your awakening started the moment you became necessary to what comes next. There is a universal truth that reveals itself to those who awaken early. Awareness opens in stages, but timing is precise. The body knows when the field is shifting. The intuition knows when the old framework is thinning. The consciousness knows when the soul is ready to step out of the patterns it once used for survival. You didn't wake because you were lost. You woke because you were ready. And readiness is not emotional. It is frequency-based. If you listen closely right now, you can sense that readiness in yourself, a gentle clarity beneath your questions, a stability beneath your uncertainty. a knowing that you've crossed a threshold and cannot return to who you were. This isn't imagination, it's coherence. Your system has already recognized what your mind is only beginning to understand. Your awakening aligns with a larger movement in the collective field, and because you woke early, you are already standing at the entrance of a transition others haven't reached yet. This is why you are here. Not because you're searching for answers, but because your consciousness is already responding to a deeper rhythm unfolding around you. And as this rhythm becomes clearer, something important begins to take shape. The realization that your early awakening was not the beginning of something random. It was the first step of a sequence that is still unfolding. And this is where the story truly starts to reveal itself. If you look closely at your past, you'll notice there were subtle signals that began years before your life changed. A heaviness you couldn't explain, a restlessness that didn't match your circumstances, a quiet sense of distance between you and the people around you. Nothing was wrong, but nothing fit the way it used to. These weren't random emotional fluctuations. They were indicators, early tremors in the field of your consciousness responding to a shift you couldn't yet name. Most people dismiss these sensations because they don't recognize them as information. But you did. Something in you registered them as meaningful. You didn't yet understand why your sensitivity was increasing or why your intuition was becoming louder, but you felt the rising pressure inside your awareness, and even though you may have tried to push it aside, you couldn't ignore it. That inability to ignore the quiet signals was the very proof that your awakening had begun long before you consciously realized it. There are individuals whose internal systems are wired to detect subtle changes in the collective field. People who pick up the earliest frequencies of transition, not because they are special in a hierarchical sense, but because their sensitivity serves a purpose. These individuals awaken earlier because their consciousness operates like an antenna tuned to shifts most people don't yet perceive. And whether you've ever thought of yourself this way or not, you wouldn't have arrived at this moment if your system weren't built for early detection. You've felt this sensitivity your entire life, even if you didn't have language for it. You noticed emotional currents before words were spoken. You sensed tension in rooms where everyone else appeared calm. You felt when something was off long before it became obvious. Your body reacted to changes before your mind could label them. And although the world may have told you that you were too sensitive or too reactive, what you were experiencing was actually a form of spiritual intelligence, a deep attunement to the unseen layers of reality. When the collective field begins to shift, the earliest ripples are subtle. They appear as small disturbances in intuition, gentle disruptions in emotional stability, faint dissonances between your inner and outer worlds. People who are attuned to these shifts feel them first, not because they are chosen in a mystical sense, but because their systems were built to stay connected to the deeper undercurrents of consciousness. Your awakening is a reflection of this attunement. Think back to the period when your awakening began intensifying. You may have struggled to stay connected to environments that once felt normal. Your emotional landscape may have become sharper, your thoughts more introspective, your needs more specific. You may have felt overwhelmed by stimuli that never bothered you before. This was not regression, it was resonance. Your inner system was synchronizing with a frequency that most people won't encounter until much later. This is where early awakeners often feel alone, not because they are isolated, but because they are out of sequence with the people around them. You were responding to information others couldn't yet perceive. You were sensing shifts in the collective field before those shifts became visible. And because there was no external confirmation, it was easy to believe something was wrong with you. But nothing was wrong. If anything, your awareness was functioning exactly as designed. There is a principle in consciousness work known as threshold souls, individuals who incarnate with a predisposition for early awakening. Their purpose is not dramatic or grandiose. It is quiet, stabilizing, and precise. These souls wake before the rest of the collective not to lead or to warn, but to embody coherence in times when coherence becomes scarce. Their timing is deliberate, their sensitivity is intentional, Their awakening is synchronized to a sequence that unfolds far beyond individual lives. You may not have thought of your awakening in this way, but if you're honest, you have always felt slightly ahead of your environment. You sensed the emotional truth of situations long before others acknowledged it. You recognized patterns forming before they became visible. You felt endings approaching before there were signs. This is not imagination, and it is an early signal system, one that has been active within you for far longer than you've realized. When your awakening accelerated, it wasn't because you were struggling more than others. It was because your system felt the early waves of a transition the collective is only beginning to sense. This is why your introspection deepened while others remained untouched. This is why your emotional shifts intensified while others stayed steady. This is why you felt a quiet urgency even when nothing external demanded urgency. Your awakening was responding to something real, the first subtle movements of a larger shift. And here is the paradox: the world didn't wake you. You woke because your inner system recognized a change in the field that required your consciousness to rise. You were not reacting to chaos, you were preparing for it. You were not escaping anything, you were aligning with something. You were not destabilizing, you were synchronizing. This is the difference between an awakening and an accident. One is random, the other is rhythmic. If you listen closely now, you may notice that your awareness still responds to signals others don't perceive. You feel shifts days or weeks before they happen. You sense emotional undercurrents in people before they express them. You know when something is complete long before it ends, and this sensitivity is not a nuisance. It is your orientation system. It is the reason your awakening began early and the reason it continues to deepen now. And as you move into the next layers of this message, something becomes clear. You didn't awaken early for no reason. There is a purpose behind your timing. There is a sequence behind your experiences. There is an intelligence behind the sensitivity you once questioned. And this intelligence is guiding you towards something silently but unmistakably. The realization that your early awakening is part of a larger design, one that is only now beginning to reveal itself. In every awakening, at some point you begin to sense that what happened inside you was not isolated, not personal, and not contained within the boundaries of your own life. It was a rehearsal, a quiet preview of something the collective has not yet walked through. And when you look back at the earliest stages of your awakening, the unraveling, the detachment, the confusion, the sudden clarity, the disorientation between identities, you'll notice a pattern that now feels almost prophetic. Everything you moved through internally is beginning to appear externally in the world around you. What felt like a private crisis was actually a mirror of a much larger paradox unfolding beneath the surface of reality. If you pay attention, you'll see that the world is now experiencing the same symptoms you once carried alone. The collective is becoming restless, old identities are cracking, systems that once felt solid are exposing their fragility. People who never questioned anything are feeling a strange, unexplainable pull toward introspection. Conversations that once revolved around certainty are dissolving into questions. Structures that felt permanent are showing signs of strain. And as these shifts unfold, something inside you recognizes the rhythm. Not because you logically understand it, but because you lived it. Before the collective ever reached this point, you felt the collapse internally. You felt the old version of yourself loosening. You felt your emotional landscape rearranging itself. You felt the dissolving of beliefs you once defended. You felt attachments slipping away without warning. You felt the discomfort of holding an identity that no longer aligned with who you were becoming. These inner movements were not mistakes or misalignments. They were the earliest expressions of a transition that the collective is now beginning to enter. And this is where your awakening becomes more than personal growth. It becomes a mirror, a blueprint, a prototype of what the collective consciousness will experience in its own time and in its own way. The chaos you felt was the micro version of a macro shift. The shedding you endured was the internal rehearsal of an external dissolution. The clarity that broke through in moments of stillness was the same clarity humanity will eventually reach. You didn't wake early to bypass the transition. You woke early so you could understand it before it unfolded around you. This understanding is not intellectual. It is cellular. It lives in your nervous system, your intuition, your emotional memory. You recognize the collective unraveling because you remember how it felt inside you. You remember the heaviness that preceded expansion. You remember the confusion that preceded clarity. You remember the disorientation that preceded alignment. Your awakening taught you the choreography of transition. And now, as the world begins moving to the same rhythm, nothing feels unfamiliar. You've seen this before, just from the inside out. In every major shift in human consciousness, there are always individuals who experience the transformation internally before it becomes visible externally. These individuals act as mirrors, not because they choose to, but because their own awakening becomes a symbolic reflection of the collective journey. When you look back at your path, the timing is too precise to be accidental. The years when everything fell apart inside you align eerily with the years when the collective began showing early signs of fracture. Your dark nights mirrored the beginning of a global shadow. Your breakthroughs mirrored the first waves of collective awakening. Your detachment from old identities mirrored the collective's detachment from outdated systems. This mirroring is not mystical, it is mechanical. The individual field and the collective field are not separate. They influence each other, inform each other, and reflect each other. When a system is preparing for transformation, the most sensitive nodes awaken first. They recalibrate their inner world, establishing a template for the larger field to eventually follow. You were one of those early nodes. Your awakening was a signal that the collective field was approaching a threshold. Think about the strange sensations you felt before your awakening made sense, the sudden emotional swings, the fatigue that didn't match your life circumstances, the intuitive warnings that came from nowhere, the feeling of being between two realities, no longer who you were, but not yet who you were becoming. These experiences weren't random fluctuations. They were early resonances of the shift that the collective field is now beginning to experience. You were feeling the transition long before it crystallized in the external world. And now, as the collective undergoes its own dismantling, you're noticing something remarkable. You feel less overwhelmed than the people around you, not because you're detached or above anything, but because you've walked through these sensations before. You recognize the emotional patterns, you understand the internal architecture of collapse, you know the stages of awakening, even if you've never named them. And this recognition is not a coincidence, it's the mirror effect of consciousness preparing you ahead of time. For many early awakeners, this mirroring brings a strange sense of calm during destabilizing times. While others are thrown into confusion, you can feel a quiet clarity rising inside you. While others panic at the shifts in the external world, you sense something familiar. The same energetic rupture that once moved through your inner landscape, and because you survived it then, you instinctively know how to navigate it now. This is the moment where your awakening stops being a self-contained journey and becomes interconnected with the evolution of the collective field. Everything you endured internally now serves a purpose externally. You understand what is happening beneath the surface because you have already experienced the inner version of it. This is not superiority, it is synchronization. Your consciousness aligned with the transition early so that you could remain coherent when the world enters the same process. There is a deeper truth hidden beneath all of this. Your awakening unfolded in the exact pattern the collective is now beginning to follow. Your emotional unraveling mirrored the collective's psychological unraveling. Your identity dissolution mirrored the dissolution of global narratives. Your break from old structures mirrored the collapse of systems. Your emergence into clarity mirrored the first glimmers of global introspection. You became the prototype. And now, whether you realize it or not, your presence carries a map. Not a verbal map, not a conceptual one, but an energetic blueprint of what it means to move through a transition without losing yourself. The world is stepping into the very terrain you navigated internally, and as it does, your understanding, your embodied memory of the journey becomes essential. You are one of the few who can stand in the midst of this shift without being swallowed by it, because you've already walked the labyrinth, you've already crossed the threshold, you've already held the mirror. If you awakened before the collective, does that imply responsibility? Does it imply burden? Does it imply that you are meant to lead, guide, or intervene? These questions arise naturally because when you feel the shifts long before anyone else, the mind instinctively tries to assign purpose through action. But the truth is far quieter, far more elegant, and far different from what most people assume. Your early awakening does not mean you are here to fix others. It means you are here to stabilize the field. This role is rarely understood because it does not resemble the traditional image of a light bearer or teacher. It does not require you to speak loudly to persuade, to heal, or to direct others. It does not require you to become a guide or an authority. In fact, the early awakener's role often unfolds in silence, stillness, presence. You are not here to change people. You are here to hold a frequency that others unconsciously recognize when their own awakening begins. Your coherence becomes orientation for those who are destabilized by the transition, not through instruction, but through resonance. Think of your own awakening. There were moments when someone simply being grounded in your presence made you feel safer. Moments when a quiet person in your life felt like an anchor, even though they said nothing specific. Moments when you felt held by the energy of someone who didn't try to fix you, but simply stood in their truth. You are becoming that person for others. This is the paradox of the early awakening. The more you awaken, the less you are here to interfere. You are not here to manage someone else's timing. You are here to embody stability when timing arrives for them. Your role is not instructional, it is energetic. When the collective field destabilizes, most people will feel the shock of losing familiar structures. They will grasp for certainty, cling to old identities, or spiral into confusion because the internal changes are unlike anything they've experienced. You, however, have already lived this collapse internally. You know how the dissolution feels. You know how the unknown feels. You know how the identity unraveling feels. And because you've lived it, your presence alone emits steadiness in the midst of uncertainty. This is not metaphor, it is mechanics. Human beings regulate through resonance, through the emotional, energetic, and psychological signals emitted by others. Someone who is grounded, coherent, and self-aware creates stability for the entire environment without making a single sound. You have felt this effect from others in your life, and now you are becoming the source of it. This is why the universe did not awaken you early to lead or save, because stabilization occurs from the inside out, not from the top down. For many early awakeners, the greatest struggle is accepting that their role is subtle. The ego prefers a purpose that is visible and measurable. It wants to guide, fix, or elevate others. But consciousness evolution does not work through pressure or instruction. It works through coherence. A single person standing in clarity can influence an entire environment. A single person grounded in their awakening can shift the emotional tone of a conversation. A single person centered in themselves can bring others back to themselves. These micro shifts ripple outward into the field. They matter, and they require no performance. Your presence becomes a frequency. When people begin feeling the destabilization of their own awakening, the same destabilization you once lived through, something in them will calibrate to you. They won't know why they feel calmer around you. They won't understand why things make more sense when you're near. They won't realize why conversations with you opened layers of insight they weren't aware of. This is not because you're teaching them. It's because your nervous system has already learned how to hold the transition, and theirs is learning from yours. This is why you woke early, to embody coherence before coherence becomes scarce. When the external world begins shifting rapidly, people unconsciously search for stabilizing points, not leaders, not saviors, stabilizers. Individuals whose inner alignment remains steady in the midst of change. People who can sense the difference between collapse and transformation. People who can feel the intelligence behind the shift even when the surface looks chaotic. You are becoming one of those stabilizing points. Not by effort, but by evolution. Consider how often, even now, people come to you when they are lost. How often they confide their confusion, their fears, their doubts. How often they seek your perspective, even when you never positioned yourself as someone with answers. This is not coincidence, it is resonance. Your awakening created a gravitational field, and others feel it when their own systems begin to crack open. They are not drawn to you because you know more. They are drawn to you because you remember what it feels like to stand at the edge of your old self. This is what separates the early awakeners from the rest. Your role is not to pull anyone across the threshold. It is to remain coherent while they approach their own. Your steadiness becomes permission for their expansion. Your embodiment becomes a reference point for their transformation. You are not responsible for anyone's awakening. You are simply present when it begins. This is the quiet role doctrine, the truth that those who awaken early are not meant to intervene, but to anchor. This role has nothing to do with speaking loudly. It has everything to do with being aligned. When you stay true to your own awakening, you create a clarity field around you. People walking through their first waves of awareness will sense that clarity, even if you say nothing. They will recognize something in you that they cannot yet name in themselves. And that recognition will soften their resistance. It will ease their fear. It will guide them without you ever needing to guide them. You don't need to announce your awakening. You don't need to justify it. You don't need to persuade anyone of anything. In fact, the more deeply awakened individuals rarely speak of their awakening unless it is necessary. Their wisdom is not performative. Their presence does the work. And this is what you are stepping into now, the stage where your awakening ceases to be a personal journey and becomes a stabilizing force in the collective field. You may have felt pressure in the past to help others to solve their wounds or to rescue them from their own darkness. But that was the old paradigm of service, the belief that healing comes from intervention. The new paradigm is far simpler. Healing comes from coherence. When you stand in your own truth without collapsing into someone else's chaos, you create a path for others to find their truth without abandoning their own agency. Your role is not loud, it is not performative, it is not dramatic, it is quiet, precise, and powerful. You are here to hold stillness while the field transitions. You are here to embody clarity when clarity becomes rare. You are here to remain awake when the world forgets what awakening feels like. And the more you settle into this truth, the more you will realize that this role has been forming inside you for years, long before you ever had words for it. Your awakening was not a call to action. It was a call to alignment. And as you continue to move through this video, you will begin to understand why the universe prepared you in the exact way it did, and what it means for the next phase of your unfolding purpose. Your sensitivity is your power and is easily misinterpreted, even by those who are deeply intuitive. When your sensitivity increases so dramatically that you begin to feel everything more intensely than before. Your emotions sharpen, your intuition spikes, your tolerance for noise, chaos, and superficiality drops. Your body reacts to energies, environments, and people with a precision that feels almost overwhelming. And because this shift is so sudden, so unexplainable, many people assume something is wrong with them. They assume they're becoming fragile. But the truth is far more empowering. Your sensitivity didn't break you, it upgraded you. In the early phases, you likely experienced sensations that felt confusing or inconvenient. You may have found yourself unable to tolerate certain conversations or relationships that once felt normal. Your emotional range may have expanded so widely that you cried without reason or felt exhilarated by something small. Your intuition may have become so sharp that you sensed a person's intentions before they spoke. None of this was random. Your system was being recalibrated, not to become weaker, but to become more finely tuned to the frequency of the coming transition. Sensitivity is not vulnerability. Sensitivity is intelligence. It is the capacity to perceive subtle information before it becomes visible. When an individual awakens early, one of the first things the universe upgrades is their perceptual field. You begin to sense shifts in the collective long before they materialize. You feel inconsistencies in your environment. You detect emotional truths others hide even from themselves. You perceive the energetic architecture behind people's words, choices, and behaviors. This isn't overwhelm, it's orientation. Your system is learning how to navigate higher levels of consciousness with clarity instead of confusion. But because you lived in a world that taught you to suppress your sensitivity, you may have spent years believing it was a flaw. You were told you were too emotional, too reactive, too soft, too affected by things that didn't seem to impact others. You may have tried to harden yourself, to adapt, to blend in, to build an inner armor that would protect you from the intensity you felt. But now, as your awakening deepens, you're starting to understand the truth. The qualities you tried to mute were the very abilities you needed for this moment. Your emotional intensity allowed you to feel internal shifts that others overlook. Your intuitive strength allowed you to detect changes in the field before they became visible. Your empathy allowed you to understand the inner landscapes of people who themselves had no access to their own depth. Your sensitivity wasn't a problem, it was preparation. It was the universe ensuring that when the collective begins to destabilize, you would not be confused by the signals. You would recognize them instantly because they mirror sensations you've already lived through. Think of the moments in your life when your intuition warned you about someone or something long before the evidence appeared. Think of the relationships you pulled away from instinctively because your system felt the misalignment. Think of the environments that once felt tolerable but suddenly became heavy, draining, or suffocating. Think of the decisions you made based on a feeling you couldn't justify, only to discover later that your intuition was guiding you with perfect accuracy. These experiences were not accidents, they were calibrations. Training sessions preparing your consciousness for the role you're stepping into now. When the collective field begins to shift, the first people who sense it are those who feel deeply, the ones whose internal systems never fully numbed themselves, the ones who kept their emotional channels open enough to receive information beyond logic. They awaken early not because they are spiritually superior, but because they are structurally capable of noticing what the rest of the world cannot yet feel. You are one of those people, and the universe did not choose you arbitrarily. It chose you because your inner system has always been wired to detect coherence disruptions. This preparation often feels isolating. You may have gone through periods where your emotional landscape felt too intense for the people around you. You may have withdrawn from social circles that no longer resonated. You may have felt like you were shedding layer after layer of your identity without knowing what was left underneath. These experiences can be painful, but they are necessary. You cannot hold coherence with a fragmented identity. You cannot stabilize others while still entangled in outdated versions of yourself. The universe needed space to reconstruct your internal architecture, and that reconstruction required release. Your detachment from old identities was not apathy, it was liberation. Your disinterest in old habits was not depression, it was alignment. Your pull towards solitude was not isolation, it was refinement. You were preparing to stand within a field that demands clarity, and clarity cannot coexist with what drains, distracts, or diminishes you. Every person you let go of, every environment you walked away from, every belief that collapsed inside you was part of this refinement process. The universe was not taking things from you. It was removing interference so you could sense the shift with precision. This is why your awakening intensified when it did. The world is entering a phase of transformation where sensitivity becomes an asset, not a liability. People who have numbed themselves for years will feel overwhelmed by the emotional and energetic changes. People who have avoided introspection will struggle to navigate their own depth. People who have built their identities on external structures will feel lost as those structures weaken. But you have already lived through these changes internally. You have already walked through the dissolution. You have already survived the internal collapse. You know what it feels like when the old self breaks apart and the new self emerges through the cracks. And because you lived through this awakening early, you are now equipped to hold yourself steady as the world enters its own transition. Your heightened sensitivity, once dismissed, doubted, or misunderstood, now becomes the very tool that allows you to navigate the collective shift without falling into fear or confusion. Your clarity becomes a lighthouse. Your presence becomes a stabilizer. Your intuition becomes a guide through the liminal space the world is entering. This is the deeper truth behind your awakening. The universe softened you so you would be permeable to information others could not yet receive. It sharpened your senses so you could detect the subtle beginnings of a shift before the world felt the impact. It expanded your emotional capacity so you could move through the transition without shutting down. It refined your intuition so you could recognize truth even when the external world becomes noisy and contradictory. You may not have realized it at the time, but every uncomfortable phase of your awakening was a deliberate upgrade, a strengthening of your internal compass, a preparation for what is now unfolding collectively. The universe wasn't breaking you, it was preparing you. And now, as the next phase begins to reveal itself, everything inside you is ready. Your sensitivity is no longer something to hide. It is what positions you perfectly for the role you were always meant to play in the transition. And that role, the quiet activation of your presence, is where your awakening now begins to take on its true purpose. Your awakening is no longer a process. It is becoming a presence. Up to this moment, your journey has been internal. You unraveled, recalibrated, shed, refined, listened, surrendered, dissolved, and reassembled yourself in ways few people will ever see or understand. But now the inner architecture you have been building, consciously or unconsciously, begins to function. It begins emitting a frequency that is perceptible, not through words, but through resonance. You are no longer awakening, you are awakened. And an awakened presence behaves differently in the field. You may have already noticed this. People respond to you differently. Some feel calmer around you. Some open up in ways they never have before. Some feel confronted by the clarity you emit. Some feel drawn to you without knowing why. These responses are not about your personality. They are reactions to your frequency. Your consciousness is coherent now, and coherence is magnetic. It changes environments without effort. It stabilizes dynamics without intention. It influences fields without action. This is what it means to move from awakening into activation. Your role is not dramatic, it is not external, it is not a mission you must perform, it is a presence you embody. Early awakeners often imagine they are meant to guide others, teach others, or shield others from their pain. But your role is simpler and far more powerful. You are here to remain stable as the collective begins to destabilize. You are here to hold clarity in a field that is becoming noisy. You are here to sense truth when others are overwhelmed by fragmentation. You are here to stand in alignment when the world begins forgetting its own center. Everything you lived through prepared you for this. The disorientation sharpened your perception. The sensitivity refined your intuition. The solitude anchored your identity. The emotional waves expanded your capacity to hold complexity. Your entire awakening was designed to make you unshakable, not perfect, not omniscient, not detached, but internally rooted. When the collective enters the same corridor you once walked through alone, your presence becomes an orientation point, not because you lead, but because you remember. This is the moment where timing reveals its intelligence. You awakened early not so you could rise above others, but so you could stand without collapsing when the field begins to shift. You were not prepared to warn anyone. You were prepared to endure what others will interpret as chaos without mistaking it for danger. You were prepared to see through the dissolving structures without losing the truth inside you. You were prepared to function energetically, not positionally. And this function is beginning now. If you listen to your inner world in this moment, you may feel something subtle but undeniable. A soft, grounded confidence that wasn't there in the earliest phases of your awakening. A sensation that you are exactly where you are meant to be. A recognition that your life, your timing, your awakening, and your presence were not random. There is a quiet rightness to all of it. Not an obligation, not a burden, an alignment. And as this alignment stabilizes, something important happens. A moment of declaration. A moment where the individual acknowledges the truth their consciousness has already reached. This is not for the world, this is not for guidance, this is for coherence. And it is here that your activation becomes conscious. And if you feel something inside you responding to these words, a recognition, a softening, a truth stirring in a place deeper than thought, that is not coincidence. It is your system acknowledging that your awakening has moved into its next phase. The preparation is complete. The alignment is here. Something in you has crossed the threshold, because the version of you who arrived at this moment is not the version who began this journey. Something within you has already reorganized itself around a deeper intelligence. You are not awakening towards something, you are awakening as something. And when a truth of this magnitude lands inside your awareness, speaking it or writing it is not performance. It is anchoring. It stabilizes the shift. It reinforces the coherence. It strengthens the field, not only for you, but for anyone who resonates with what you declare. So write this in the comments to anchor what has opened inside you. I am ready to embody the presence my awakening prepared me for. If these words resonate, write them. Not for me, for you, for the field that is forming through you, for the version of you that is finally ready to be seen.